The steady pulse of the city lights flickered through the misty rain as Alex sat hunched over his phone. It had been a long night of drinks, swiping through Tinder profiles, his mind fogged by alcohol and fleeting desires. His phone buzzed, a message from Alicia, a girl who seemed eager to meet. "Come over and smoke," the text read, followed by an address. It felt almost too easy, too perfect, but Alex's inebriated thoughts didn't allow for second guesses. He ordered an Uber, slumping into the front seat when it arrived. The driver, a man with a warm smile and thinning hair, seemed chatty enough. Alex, in his drunken haze, rambled on about his Tinder match, laughing about how quickly she had invited him over. The driver's smile faltered just slightly as Alex shared the address, but he didn't say much beyond wishing Alex luck. As they approached the house, unease gnawed at the edges of Alex's alcohol-induced bravado. The place was dark, no cars in the driveway, not a single light on inside. The driver lingered a moment, his hand resting on the wheel as he glanced up at the house. "Be careful, man. Looks off," he said, his voice edged with quiet concern. Alex waved it off with a slurred, "Thanks," and stumbled out of the car. The driver didn't pull away immediately, his car lingering down the street, headlights still cutting through the rain. The front yard was overgrown, weeds crawling over the broken pathway. Alex approached the front door, knocking softly, but there was no response. He knocked again, harder this time, and a shadow flickered behind the blinds. His phone buzzed. "It's open. Come inside," the text read. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. Something felt wrong. Before he could reach for the door handle, his phone rang. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number, and when he answered, it wasn't the voice of Alicia. It was his Uber driver. "Get back in the car, now." His tone was sharp, urgent. Alex hesitated, glancing back at the house, and just then, the Uber driver's car rolled back to the curb, engine idling. The air felt thick with something darker than just rain, and Alex's instincts kicked in. He sprinted back to the car, his heart pounding. Once inside, the driver didn't waste a second. He sped off, his eyes locked on the road. "That place, it's been vacant for months," the driver said, his voice low, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. "Last person who went inside didn't come out alive." Alex sat in stunned silence, the warmth of his drunken haze evaporating as the weight of what he'd almost walked into settled over him like a heavy fog. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the city streets blurring into an indistinct mesh of rain and shadows. Alex was about to thank the driver when his phone buzzed again. It was another message, from Alicia. "Why did you leave? I'm waiting for you." His blood ran cold. He stared at the screen, heart pounding louder in his chest. "Hey, I just got another message from her," Alex muttered, more to himself than the driver. The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror again, lips tightening. "Block her number. Right now. That's not Alicia." The words sent a chill down Alex's spine. He fumbled with his phone, blocking the number, but before he could say anything else, his phone buzzed again. Another message, this time from a different number. "I'm outside your house now. Come out." A creeping sense of dread crawled up his spine. He glanced out the window, rain streaking across the glass, but all he could see was darkness and the faint glow of streetlights. How would they know my address? The Uber driver's expression tightened further, his fingers gripping the wheel. "They don't. That's the point. They're just trying to scare you into something." Alex's heart thudded in his chest. He rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of everything, but nothing added up. His phone buzzed again. This time, a call. Hesitantly, he answered, expecting more creepy messages. But it wasn't Alicia. It wasn't anyone. On the other end of the line, there was only breathing. Heavy, rhythmic breathing that filled his ear. And then, a low, rasping voice. "I can see you." Alex's breath caught. He shot a glance at the rearview mirror, expecting to see the driver looking at him, but the driver's eyes were fixed on the road. "Who the hell is this?" Alex shouted into the phone, his voice breaking slightly. The breathing continued, and then the voice said, "Look out the window." Trembling, Alex turned to look through the rain-spattered window. For a moment he saw nothing but the blur of the night. Then, in a flash of headlights, he saw a figure standing beneath the streetlight. They wore a hoodie, their face obscured in shadow, but the unmistakable glint of a phone in their hand reflected in the light. "Driver!" Alex's voice cracked, filled with terror. "There's someone outside. The car lurched to a stop. The driver, still staring ahead, muttered something under his breath. His hands tightened around the steering wheel and he let out a slow, deliberate sigh. "You should never have gotten in this car." Alex's throat went dry. His pulse throbbed in his temples as he realized the car wasn't moving anymore. The driver's warm smile from earlier was gone. His eyes, once kind, were now distant, unreadable. Alex's heart raced, the air in the car suddenly suffocating. The driver turned slowly in his seat, locking eyes with Alex in the rearview mirror. "This isn't about Tinder or Alicia or whoever's outside." His voice was low, icy, and terrifyingly calm. "It's about what happens next." Alex's chest tightened as he reached for the door handle, but when he pulled, it didn't budge. Locked. "What the hell?" Alex began, but his words caught in his throat as the driver's hand reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small thin blade glinting in the dim light. "Now you stay calm," the driver said, his voice smooth as the blade, "or this gets messy." The rain pounded harder against the car roof, drowning out the pounding of Alex's heart as he stared at the blade. His vision blurred with panic as the driver's lips curled into a chilling smile. It had been too easy, too perfect. And then, from somewhere deep in the night, Alex heard the sound of footsteps approaching the car. A new figure stepped out of the darkness, tapping on the window with one gloved hand. "Looks like you're not alone after all," the driver whispered. And then the door unlocked. The door unlocked with an eerie, mechanical click, breaking through the tension like a jagged knife. Alex's pulse pounded in his ears, his hand hovering over the handle. The driver's smile lingered, cold and calculating, the blade glinting in the dim interior of the car. "Go ahead," the driver whispered, his voice barely audible over the rain. "Open it." Outside, the figure loomed in the misty night, face still hidden beneath the hood. A second tap on the window echoed through the small space of the car. The gloved hand slid down the glass, leaving streaks of rain in its wake. Alex hesitated, fear rooting him to the seat. He glanced back at the driver, then at the door. Without thinking, he yanked the handle, and the door swung open. The cold night air flooded in, bringing with it the metallic scent of rain and something else, something bitter, like blood or rust. The hooded figure stepped closer, one hand disappearing into their jacket. For a split second, Alex considered running, just bolting into the night, leaving the driver and the blade and the horror behind. But his legs refused to move. The figure crouched slightly, their face still hidden, and tossed something into the car. It landed with a soft thud on the seat next to Alex. A phone. His phone. Alex's stomach dropped as he stared down at the device. The screen flickered, showing a text message. "Why are you running? I'm still waiting." He recoiled, heart racing. How was this even possible? He had blocked the number. The figure straightened, then slowly, deliberately pushed their hood back. Alex's breath caught. The face beneath the hood was not a stranger's. It was the Uber driver. A wave of confusion and dread swept over Alex. He looked at the man still sitting in the front seat, the same face, same cold eyes, now grinning wider, teeth bared in a chilling, predatory way. "What the?" Alex stammered, his voice a trembling whisper. Two drivers, two identical faces. The second driver, the one standing outside the car, finally spoke. "You were never supposed to get away the first time, Alex." His voice was deeper, rougher than the driver in the car, but just as cold. The figure reached into his jacket again, pulling out a second phone, another one of Alex's phones. How did he have two? He had just blocked the number, hadn't he? Panic clawed at Alex's chest. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. He scrambled to shut the door, his hands shaking uncontrollably, but the driver inside the car reached out, gripping Alex's wrist with a vice-like grip. "You're not going anywhere," the seated driver growled, his grip tightening as Alex struggled. "You've been marked." Marked? The word echoed in Alex's head, sending icy tendrils of fear down his spine. His thoughts raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but everything felt twisted, like reality itself had begun to fray at the edges. The second driver, his twin, stood motionless outside the car, rain dripping from his hood as he watched with lifeless eyes. "This isn't the first time you've run, Alex, but it'll be the last." With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Alex wrenched his arm free, bolting out of the car into the night. His feet splashed through puddles, legs moving on instinct. He didn't look back, couldn't look back. The rain felt colder now, sharp like needles against his skin, the sound of his pounding heart almost deafening. But something was wrong. No matter how fast he ran, the streets around him seemed to twist, leading him back toward the same spot. He turned down alleyways, cut through back streets, but every time the houses blurred and twisted, rearranging themselves in a sick, nightmarish loop. This can't be happening. I'm not dreaming. His phone buzzed again. He slowed just enough to glance at it, dread curling in his gut. Another message, from Alicia. "You can't outrun us, Alex. Come home." His fingers trembled. The house. That house. He looked up, realizing too late that he had somehow run full circle. The vacant house stood in front of him again, dark and foreboding just as before. The door creaked open slowly, as if beckoning him inside. Behind him, the distant sound of footsteps echoed off the rain-soaked pavement. He whirled around, his breath hitching in his throat. Both drivers, the identical men, stood at the end of the street, watching, waiting. The world around him felt thin, like he was standing on the edge of something deep, something wrong. The rain slowed to a near stop. The night itself seemed to hum with an unnatural energy. Alex turned back to the house. Its open door was like a maw, dark and yawning, promising no return. "You've been marked," the driver's words echoed in his mind. With nowhere else to run, he stepped toward the house, his feet moving almost against his will. As he crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind him, and the world outside went eerily silent. The house was empty, abandoned, just like the driver had said. But it felt alive. The walls pulsed with a faint rhythmic vibration, like a heartbeat. His heartbeat. The phone in his hand buzzed one last time, the screen flashing with a final message. "Welcome home, Alex." And from the shadows, a voice whispered softly, almost tenderly, "We've been waiting for you." The last ride rain drummed heavily against the dimly lit streets as Vanessa stumbled out of the downtown bar, her heels slick with the wet pavement. Her night had unraveled into something bitter, a toxic argument with her boyfriend that left her feeling hollow and frayed. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking as she swiped to order an Uber. The downpour masked the tears welling in her eyes as she found refuge beneath the flickering street lamp. She felt alone in the world, the rain mirroring her sadness. Moments later, a black sedan glided to the curb, its sleek surface gleaming in the rain. The driver, a woman with long, dark curls that dripped water like wet vines, rolled down her window just slightly, enough for Vanessa to hear her voice over the rain. "Uber?" the woman asked, her voice soft, almost mechanical. Vanessa nodded numbly, barely registering the car or the driver before climbing into the back seat. The door shut with a heavy thud, and the air inside was thick, the smell of damp upholstery wrapping around her. She exhaled deeply, hoping to lose herself in the hum of the car's engine, in the sound of the rain beating against the windows. The glow from her phone screen illuminated her face as she tried to distract herself from the awful events of the night. But after several minutes, something gnawed at her. an unsettling feeling she couldn't quite shake. The car wasn't taking the usual route. Vanessa frowned, her pulse quickening. She leaned forward slightly, peering out the rain-streaked window, her heart sinking as the familiar streets of her neighborhood disappeared behind them. "You're going the wrong way," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, but it trembled. The driver didn't respond. Her knuckles gripped the steering wheel tightly, white with tension, her eyes focused dead ahead. Vanessa's unease turned into cold fear. She quickly checked her phone, and what she saw made her stomach drop. A notification blinked on the screen. "Your Uber has arrived." The details on the screen showed a white sedan, not the black car she was currently in. Vanessa's heart pounded against her chest as a wave of dread surged through her. "This isn't my Uber," she said louder this time, her voice cracking with panic. She reached for the door, but the handle wouldn't budge. The child locks were on. She yelled, shoving the back of the driver's seat, her voice desperate. "Let me out. This isn't my car." The driver didn't speak. Her head tilted slightly, eyes catching Vanessa's in the rearview mirror. Cold, lifeless eyes, as if she wasn't really seeing Vanessa at all. They stared at each other for a long, unsettling moment, before the woman's gaze snapped back to the road. The car jerked violently to the side, screeching to a halt on an empty, unfamiliar street. The door clicked open on its own, and Vanessa didn't hesitate. She stumbled out, the rain instantly drenching her clothes as she fell to the pavement. Her legs felt weak beneath her, barely able to carry her as she scrambled away from the car. She turned just in time to see the black sedan disappear into the night, swallowed by the misty rain. Gasping for air, Vanessa stood there trembling, trying to calm the pounding in her chest. Her phone buzzed again, a call from her actual Uber driver, the real one. "Where are you?" the older man asked, concern lacing his voice. "I've been waiting for a while now." Still shaking, Vanessa gave him her location. Within minutes, a white car, a match to the description on her phone, pulled up, and she climbed in. The older man behind the wheel listened quietly as she recounted her story, his face growing pale as the realization of what had almost happened sunk in. "You just escaped a trafficking trap," he murmured, glancing nervously at the rearview mirror. "There have been reports of people posing as Uber drivers, luring women into their cars, and..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "You were lucky." The cold, damp night pressed in on Vanessa, the weight of what could have been sinking deep into her bones. She stared out the window as the car rolled through the quiet streets, the rain continuing to fall in heavy sheets. Days passed, but Vanessa couldn't shake the memory. The black sedan, the driver's eerie eyes in the rearview mirror, the feeling of wrongness that had gripped her heart. It clung to her like a shadow she couldn't escape. One evening, as she was scrolling through her phone, a notification appeared on her screen. It was from Uber. Her stomach churned when she read the message. "Your ride has been completed. Rate your driver." Vanessa stared at it, confused. She hadn't ordered an Uber. She hadn't even left her apartment. Trembling, she clicked on the notification, and a chill ran down her spine when she saw the details. It was the black sedan, the one that had taken her the wrong way, the one she had escaped from. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unknown number. "Did you think you could run?" Her blood turned to ice. Her fingers hovered over the phone, and then, as if by some malevolent force, her screen lit up with a map. A small, blinking dot, her location, slowly began to move across the screen. The car. It was coming back. Vanessa's heart raced as her phone buzzed with another message. "We're not done." She felt sick. Frantic, she grabbed her keys and bolted out of her apartment, dialing the police with shaking hands. She drove aimlessly, trying to put distance between herself and whatever was out there, stalking her. But no matter how fast she drove, no matter how many turns she took, she couldn't shake the feeling that the black sedan was always just one step behind her. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a voice message. With trembling hands, Vanessa played it. There was no voice, no words, just the sound of a car engine idling in the rain. A week later, Vanessa moved out of her apartment. She thought distance would bring safety. New locks, new surroundings, new life. But it wasn't long before she realized that no matter where she went, it would never be far enough. One night, months after the incident, she was heading home late from work. The rain fell again, a heavy, relentless downpour. She had been taking cabs ever since, avoiding Uber altogether. But as she stepped outside her office building, she realized she had left her wallet at home. Her phone was the only option. She hesitated, staring at the Uber app. She told herself it was just a ride, a way home. With a deep breath, she ordered the car. Minutes later, a sedan pulled up. It was black, too familiar. Her heart pounded as the window rolled down, revealing the driver, a different woman this time, or so it seemed. But the voice that came through was the same as before, soft and mechanical. Uber? Vanessa froze, her feet rooted to the pavement. She stared into the driver's eyes, cold and empty, like they were waiting for her to climb in, for the trap to close again. The rain poured harder, drumming against the car roof as if urging her to decide. The door clicked open. The last thing Vanessa heard was the sound of the rain swallowing her scream. It was an unusually quiet night when David, an Uber driver in a small town, got a ping for a pickup. His phone displayed a man's name, John, waiting outside a liquor store, long closed for the night. The streets were eerily empty as he approached, rain misting the windows. A hollow chill ran through the air, thick with the scent of wet asphalt and something else, something he couldn't place. As David pulled up to the store, two young men stood by the curb, faces obscured by shadows. They moved in sync, barely visible under the flickering street lamp. Something about them felt off. One opened the back door, sliding in silently. The other followed, stiff and expressionless. Neither spoke. David's unease grew. He checked the rearview mirror, trying to make out their features. The dim light and mist made it impossible to see their faces clearly. He swallowed, his hand tightening on the steering wheel. "John?" he asked, his voice barely concealing a tremor. A slow nod came from the figure on the right, but neither man spoke. The silence hung heavy, as if the car itself had swallowed the sound. The drive through the desolate streets felt endless, their journey stretching like a nightmare without end. The passengers whispered to each other in low, hurried tones, their voices mingling with the hum of the engine. Each time David glanced up at the mirror, their conversations stopped. Eyes, pale and intense, stared back at him, watching. "Where are we heading?" David finally asked, breaking the oppressive quiet. His voice seemed too loud in the suffocating silence. For a moment, nothing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, one of the men in the back seat spoke. "Harris Avenue." The words were clipped, almost spat, sending a chill down David's spine. The air in the car grew thicker, heavier with something unseen. He no longer dared to look back. As they neared the address, David's heart sank. The location they had given him was a decaying, abandoned storefront. The windows were boarded up, graffiti scrawled across the crumbling bricks. A dim, flickering street lamp cast sickly shadows on a group of figures gathered outside, their faces hidden beneath plain white masks. The sight twisted David's stomach into knots. These weren't ordinary masks. They looked grotesque, like they were carved out of porcelain, featureless but menacing. One of the figures turned toward the car. Though the mask obscured his face, David felt his gaze. Cold, predatory eyes burned through the holes in the mask, staring directly at him. "I think this is it," David mumbled, barely able to get the words out. His voice trembled, his hands shaking as he slowed the car. Without warning, the two passengers shifted violently. David's breath hitched as both men reached into their jackets and pulled out identical masks, slipping them on in perfect synchronization. His pulse quickened, the small space of the car suddenly feeling claustrophobic. A sharp, metallic click echoed in the cabin. Cold steel pressed against David's shoulder. A gun. The man closest to him leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Pull up to them." David's heart raced as he complied, his body moving on autopilot. He parked the car directly in front of the masked group, now advancing slowly, their white masks glowing under the street lamp like specters in the night. The largest figure tapped on David's window with the barrel of his gun, his breath fogging the glass. "Your wallet," he demanded, his voice muffled but unmistakably threatening. David's hands trembled as he fumbled for his wallet, handing it over without a word. His entire body felt cold, paralyzed by fear. The masked men worked quickly, rifling through his wallet, taking everything of value. One of them snatched his phone from the console before stepping back, his expressionless mask reflecting the faint light. The two passengers slid out of the car without a sound, rejoining the masked group. As they drifted away into the mist, one of them kicked the car door, leaving a deep, jagged dent. The car shook with the impact, and David winced, his fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. For a long moment, he sat there, staring ahead, frozen in place. The fog thickened around the car, swallowing the figures as they disappeared into the night. He barely breathed, his chest tight, his mind a whirl of terror and confusion. Eventually, with shaky hands, David started the car and drove off, his breath shallow, his eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror, expecting to see them following. But the road was empty. Days passed, but the encounter lingered in David's mind. The faces, those masks, haunted him. No matter how many times he tried to brush it off, the fear gnawed at him. One night, while sitting in his living room, his phone buzzed with a notification. He frowned, not recognizing the number. Hesitant, he opened the message. "You left something behind." David's heart skipped a beat. There was no name, no context, just that single cryptic message. His fingers hovered over the screen, confusion quickly morphing into dread. He hadn't left anything, had he? Before he could respond, his phone buzzed again. This time, a photo. He opened it, and the blood drained from his face. It was his wallet, resting on a familiar cracked sidewalk, right in front of the dilapidated storefront from that night. Panic surged through him. How? He had lost the wallet. It was stolen, taken by those men. His hands shook as he typed out a response, asking who this was. Seconds later, the phone rang. He answered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who is this?" No response. But in the background, he heard it. Breathing. Slow, deliberate. And then, a soft whisper. "We'll see you soon." The call ended abruptly, leaving David in the suffocating silence of his apartment. His heart raced, sweat beading on his forehead. He knew he couldn't stay there. He grabbed his keys, deciding to leave town for a few days, put some distance between him and whatever nightmare he had stumbled into. As he stepped outside, the night was still and eerily quiet. His car sat in the driveway, the windows fogged from the evening chill. But something was wrong. His breath caught in his throat as he noticed the deep dent on the driver's side door, the same dent from that night. He hadn't gotten it fixed yet, but there was something new. A smear. A red handprint streaked across the handle. David's chest tightened with terror. He stepped closer, and then he saw it. Another mask, identical to the ones worn by the men that night, was propped up on the driver's seat. His legs felt weak, the world tilting under him. The mask stared back at him through the glass, cold and unfeeling. And from somewhere deep in the shadows, he heard it again. The low, deliberate breathing, closer this time, growing louder with every second. David turned to run, but stopped dead in his tracks. Standing at the end of his driveway were three figures, faces obscured by the same white masks. They weren't done with him yet. David never made it out of town. The police found his car the next morning, abandoned, with his phone still inside. The only clue left behind was a single mask resting on the driver's seat, a faint smile etched into its blank porcelain face.